I remember that Tuesday like it was a horror movie opening scene. The kind where you think it's just another ordinary day until it's not. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through emails, thinking about what I was going to grill for lunch, when I heard the familiar thud of the mail dropping in the mailbox. Usually, it's bills, flyers, and junk I throw away without a second thought. But that day, one envelope made my stomach turn. It was thick, official-looking, and stamped with the HOA logo. I didn't even have to open it to feel my pulse spike. Something about that logo made the air in the room feel heavier. Slowly, carefully, I tore it open. And then I froze. $100,000. I read it again and again. My eyes burned, I blinked, I pinched myself. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe they meant $100 or $1,000, not $100,000. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the letter. My coffee went cold. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. $100,000 for what? I whispered to myself, out loud, like saying it would make it less real, but it didn't. I read the letter slowly, each sentence more absurd than the last. Your fence is not the correct shade of brown. Your mailbox tilts at an angle deemed unacceptable. Your lawn exceeds the maximum allowable blade height by 1/16 of an inch. I dropped the letter on the table. 1/16 of an inch. My mailbox tilted. My fence color, I rubbed my eyes. Surely there was some mistake. Surely the HOA was kidding. But then I looked at the bottom of the page at the bold signature of the board president and felt my stomach sink. Nope. No joke, no mistake, just bureaucracy at its cruelest. I paced, around the kitchen, around the living room, around the hallway, muttering under my breath. $100,000 could buy a new car, pay off a small mortgage, or send my kid to college. And they wanted it because of my fence and mailbox. My mind raced through the possibilities. Ignore it, they'd probably take me to court. Comply, that would cost a fortune. Fight them, I didn't even know where to start. And then it hit me, the rage. Not just the panic, but the anger. That slow, simmering kind that makes your hands twitch, your teeth grit, your brain start plotting in ways you never thought you'd admit out loud. I thought about every time they fined me for illegal plantings, every passive-aggressive note slid under my door, every meeting where their smug smiles made me feel like I'd committed some unthinkable crime. And now $100,000. I could hear my neighbors outside, mowing lawns, waving hello, blissfully unaware that one letter could turn my world upside down. I stared out the window at them, feeling the absurdity of the situation crash into me. How had it come to this? How had a fence, a mailbox, and a lawn turned into a financial apocalypse waiting at my front door? My phone buzzed, a text from a friend. Everything okay? I laughed bitterly. Okay, nothing about this was okay. And I couldn't even bring myself to explain it in a text. How do you explain that an organization exists whose sole purpose seems to be tormenting you, and now they want more money than most people make in a year? I needed air. I stepped outside, letter in hand, pretending to be casual, but every step felt like I was walking through quicksand. The sun was shining. Birds were chirping. Normal life continued, oblivious to the nightmare that had just arrived in my mailbox. I looked around. Nobody understood, nobody cared, and maybe that was the worst part. By the time I went back inside, I had made a silent decision. I wasn't going to pay them, not yet. I wasn't going to roll over. But what I was going to do, I didn't know. All I knew was that the game had changed, and I had been forced to play. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, irrational voice whispered, maybe it was time to fight back. Maybe it was time to show the HOA that they couldn't push me around. Little did I know, that letter was just the beginning. By the end of the week, nothing in my life would look the same. And that $100,000 fine, it wasn't just money. It was the spark that would light a fuse I didn't even know existed. The morning after I opened the letter, I didn't sleep. Not really. I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying every word over and over. $100,000. That number wasn't just big, it was life-changing, catastrophic, absurd. And the kicker, it wasn't even clear what it was for. The letter had a list, but the list, it felt like a joke, or maybe a cruel test. I got up, shuffled to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and stared at it like maybe the caffeine would make the world make sense. I read the letter again. Your fence exceeds approved height regulations. Okay, fine. Mailbox tilts at a non-compliant angle. Really? I looked at my mailbox. Tilted, maybe just a little, but $100,000. They had to be joking. I paced the house, muttering under my breath, imagining the HOA board members sitting together, laughing, sharpening their pencils like villains in a movie. Let's see how far we can push this guy, I imagined them saying. $100,000 should do it. I tried to call them. I thought maybe if I could reason with them, explain the situation, maybe, just maybe, they'd realize how ridiculous this was. I dialed the number listed on the letter, and that's when the horror hit a new level. HOA, how may I help you? The voice on the other end was calm, polite, but there was an edge to it, like a blade hidden under a velvet glove. Yes, hi, I just received your letter, the $100,000 fine. I tried to keep my voice steady. I think there's been a mistake. Oh, no mistake, the voice said, smooth, unshakable. Your violations are very clear. All fees must be paid in full by Friday, or legal action will be taken. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost spilled my coffee. Legal action, by Friday. I could almost see the headlines in my mind. Ordinary homeowner bankrupted by HOA. I sat at the kitchen table trying to breathe. I looked out the window. My neighbors were out mowing their lawns, talking about nothing, living their peaceful lives. They had no idea. Nobody ever had any idea. And that's when the creeping paranoia set in. Every glance out the window, every shadow, every friendly neighbor wave started to feel like a potential threat. Were they judging me, reporting me? My mind was spinning. I grabbed the letter again, desperate for clarity. The violations were absurd. Lawn height, fence color, mailbox angle, the list went on. I laughed, but it was bitter, hollow. 1/16 of an inch. Are you kidding me? I muttered. But my laughter didn't help. It was the kind of laughter that hides panic. By afternoon, I started packing again, obsessively checking the property. I measured the fence with a tape measure, tilted my mailbox experimentally, counted the blades of grass. Was it enough? Too much? I didn't know. The HOA's rules weren't just strict, they were impossible. And they were merciless. Then came the first real wave of dread. I realized this wasn't just a fine. This was a test of control, a psychological siege. And in the back of my mind, a small, unsettling thought whispered, what if they pushed too far? What if ignoring it meant losing everything? I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't. My emails went unanswered, my coffee went cold, and my hands twitched constantly. I felt trapped in my own home, under constant scrutiny, under invisible chains. And yet, part of me felt a strange, dangerous thrill. Something in me wanted to fight back. I could feel it building, a simmering tension, like a storm gathering on the horizon. By evening, I made a decision. I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't let them think they could bully me, bend me to their ridiculous rules, and drain my bank account without a fight. I had to act. But how, I didn't know yet. The shotgun I'd inherited from my grandfather sat in the corner collecting dust. I didn't touch it, not yet. But it was there, a silent reminder that maybe, just maybe, the rules were about to change. I went to bed that night with a mixture of fear, rage, and anticipation. Every creak in the house sounded louder. Every shadow on the wall looked like someone watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. Little did I know, by tomorrow, the first real confrontation would begin, and my quiet, ordinary life would never be the same again. I woke up Thursday morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head was pounding, my nerves frayed, and the $100,000 letter was still sitting on the kitchen counter, silently mocking me. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just wait for Friday and hope the HOA would take mercy on me. Hope was for people who didn't get terrorized over fence colors. I had to act. I took a deep breath, poured some coffee, and tried to convince myself I could handle this diplomatically. Rationally, calmly, like a normal, reasonable adult. I picked up the phone and dialed the HOA number. Hopping the other side of the line was at least human. HOA, this is Mrs. Carter speaking. How may I help you? The voice was cheerful, almost sickeningly so. Hi, I said, trying to steady my voice, though it came out shaky. This is about the $100,000 fine. I think there's been a mistake. I'd like to discuss it. There was a pause, long enough for me to sweat bullets and second-guess everything. Then, Mr. Wilson, all violations are documented. All fees are valid. You are expected to comply immediately. I swallowed hard, forcing my jaw to unclench. But this is $100,000. It's more than my car, my rent, more than some people make in a year. Surely there's some flexibility. Oh, no flexibility. Compliance is mandatory, the board has spoken. Deadline is Friday. I could feel my blood pressure spike. My fingers were twitching. My brain was screaming, this is insane, this is insane, this is insane, but I tried to keep my voice calm. Rational, reasonable. I'm happy to cooperate, I said, biting back a scream. But some of these violations, they're ridiculous. My mailbox isn't perfect. The grass is an inch too high. Is this really worth $100,000? There was a faint chuckle on the other end, almost musical in its cruelty. Mr. Wilson, the board considers all details important. Have a nice day. Click. The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, staring at the phone. Click. That sound echoed in my head like a gavel striking doom. My rational adult self wanted to calm down, to breathe, to think logically. My inner self, well, let's just say it started imagining the most satisfying ways to make them regret it. I sat back at the kitchen table, running my hands over my face, thinking about what just happened. That call wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a negotiation. It was a declaration of war. The HOA had officially drawn a line in the sand, and somehow they were daring me to cross it. I spent the next hour packing, obsessively rereading the letter, taking notes, writing down every violation. My coffee had gone cold long ago, my cat was staring at me like I'd lost my mind, and every sound outside the house made me jump. The neighbors were out in their yards again, mowing, chatting, laughing, completely oblivious to the psychological siege going on in my living room. I started imagining what it would be like if I just ignored it. Surely they couldn't actually enforce $100,000. Could they? No, of course they could. These people had rules, bylaws, and more paperwork than a small government. I felt trapped, but trapped didn't mean powerless. Oh no, trapped meant one thing. It was time to fight back. Somehow. By evening, I had made a plan, or at least the beginning of one. I would document everything. Every fence panel, every mailbox angle, every single blade of grass if I had to. I'd photograph it, measure it, make a case so airtight that not even the HOA's most rigid board member could argue against it. And if they tried to push me further, well, let's just say I had a backup plan in my head. Something that involved the shotgun sitting in the corner of my garage. Not loaded, not aimed, but comforting. I went to bed that night with my mind racing, imagining scenarios I'd never thought I'd imagine. I pictured meetings, confrontations, standoffs. I imagined myself standing in my driveway, the HOA officers approaching in their little golf cart army, and me defending my home, my mailbox, my sanity. The absurdity was almost comical, but the tension was very real. Little did I know, by tomorrow, things would escalate. The friendly facade of the neighborhood, the calm skis, the birds chirping outside, it was all about to shatter. The HOA had made their move, and I was about to make mine. But what I didn't realize was that once the first confrontation began, nothing in my life would ever be ordinary again. Friday morning arrived like a ticking time bomb. I woke up with that gnawing pit in my stomach, the kind that tells you something terrible is coming, and there's no escaping it. The letter still sat on the kitchen table, staring at me like an executioner's blade. $100,000. The words refused to leave my mind. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't even sip my coffee without thinking about how my life had become some kind of absurd nightmare. I needed a plan, not just a rational plan, a real plan. I paced the living room, glancing at my walls, the windows, the quiet street outside. Everything felt different now, paranoid, suspicious. I started imagining scenarios that would have sounded insane just a week ago. What if they came to my door? What if they tried to enforce this financial terror? The thought alone made my hands tight, my jaw clench. And that's when my eyes fell on it, the shotgun. Grandpa's old, dusty relic sitting in the corner like some silent sentinel. I hadn't touched it in years, I never wanted to, but somehow just seeing it there gave me a small, dangerous sense of control. I didn't touch it, not yet. But I held it in my mind, imagining it as a shield, a warning, a symbol that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely powerless. I sat down at the table and pulled out the letter again, this time with a notebook beside me. Every violation, every absurd fine, every bureaucratic threat, I wrote it all down. My handwriting grew messy as my mind raced faster and faster. 1/16 of an inch of grass too tall, mailbox tilting at a non-compliant angle. Fence color wrong. It was ridiculous. But ridiculous or not, the rules were real, and the penalties were lethal to my bank account. I decided that if I was going to fight, I had to fight smart. No yelling, no rants on the HOA's forum, no viral TikTok rants. I had to document. Photograph every fence panel. Measure the mailbox at different angles. Measure the grass with a ruler down to the millimeter if I had to. I even started timing myself mowing the lawn, calculating if I could somehow claim I had reduced my violation exposure by 0.2% per hour. My neighbors probably thought I had lost my mind. Hours passed and my anxiety only grew. I imagined the board members sitting somewhere, smirking, clicking their pens like executioners, thinking, he doesn't even know what's coming. And maybe they were right. Maybe I had no idea. But I was going to find out. I wasn't going to roll over. Then I started thinking about confrontations. Face to face. What would I say? How would I act? Could I even stay calm if they showed up at my door, armed with paperwork and righteous indignation? I ran scenarios over and over, each one more dramatic than the last. I imagined them approaching in their little golf cart army, clipboards raised, smug smiles on their faces. And me, standing in the driveway, the shotgun leaning casually in my hand. Not loaded, not pointed, just a presence. I laughed bitterly at myself. I'd never been a violent person. I didn't want to be. But I also didn't want to be bullied, threatened, or humiliated. The fantasy of confrontation made my pulse race, gave me a strange, twisted thrill. It was like preparing for a storm, scary but exhilarating. By evening, I had a rudimentary plan. Document everything, photograph everything, and be ready to defend myself if it came to that. I also knew I needed allies, or at least witnesses. Neighbors who knew me, neighbors who could testify that my lawn was maintained, my mailbox functional, my fence. I went to bed that night with the notebook under my pillow, my mind buzzing with possibilities, my heart hammering. Every creak in the house sounded louder. Every shadow felt like a lurking observer. I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA wasn't done, not by a long shot. And then I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just preparing for a fine. I was preparing for a battle, a real psychological battle, and once the first move was made, there would be no going back. My quiet, ordinary life was officially over. The stage was set, and I was about to step into the ring. Little did I know, tomorrow would be the day the HOA made their first move. And when that knock finally came at my door, the world I had known would shatter, piece by piece, into a nightmare I couldn't ignore. Saturday morning arrived with an ominous calm. The sun was shining, birds chirping, and for anyone passing by, it looked like a perfect day in the neighborhood. But inside, I was a storm. Every muscle in my body was tense. My hands itched. My mind raced with scenarios, each one more absurd and terrifying than the last. The letter had set everything in motion, and now the HOA had a chance to make the first real move. I had barely finished my coffee when I heard it, the distinct sound of a golf cart rolling up my driveway. My pulse doubled. I froze mid-sip, my eyes darting to the living room corner where the shotgun sat. Not loaded, not aimed, but it was there. And somehow its presence calmed me slightly. Through the window, I saw two figures step out of the cart. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, expressions somewhere between smug and deadly serious. My stomach dropped. These were the enforcers, the people who could ruin lives over fence color and mailbox angles. And today, they had officially come for me. I opened the door before they knocked, trying to look calm, casual. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. "Good morning," I said, forcing a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," one of them replied, voice dripping with authority. "We're here regarding the $100,000 fine. We'd like to discuss compliance." I gestured toward the driveway, trying to keep my hands visible. "Of course, come in, or well, we can talk out here." My voice wavered, betraying my nerves. They set their clipboards down, flipping through the pages like surgeons examining charts. I couldn't stop staring at them, my mind racing. One wrong move, one wrong word, and who knew what kind of paperwork nightmare they could drag me into next. "Your fence," the first officer said, pointing to the boundary line. "Height exceeds maximum allowable limits. Your mailbox angle is non-compliant. Your grass is slightly above regulation. All documented." I felt a flush of anger, heat rising from my chest. "Slightly? You're serious? This is $100,000 serious." I forced myself to take a step back to breathe. "I can fix the mailbox, mow the lawn, repaint the fence if needed, but the amount you're asking is insane. It's life-ruining." They didn't blink, didn't flinch. One nodded at the other as if sharing a secret joke. My brain screamed, they're enjoying this. They're feeding on it. I stepped closer, trying to inject some calm into the situation, some humanity. "Look, I'm reasonable. I want to comply, but $100,000. There has to be another way. Can we negotiate?" The second officer leaned slightly forward, and their smile was like a guillotine. "Mr. Wilson, compliance is non-negotiable. The board has made its decision. Deadline is today. Failure to pay will result in legal proceedings." I felt my pulse spike. My fingers twitched involuntarily. My mind went to the shotgun again, not as a weapon but as a symbol. A way to show that I wasn't helpless. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. But the thought alone gave me a strange, dangerous strength. I laughed nervously. "Non-negotiable, for a mailbox angle, you have to be kidding." "No joke, Mr. Wilson," they said. "All rules are strictly enforced. Have a nice day." And with that, they left. No warning, no discussion, no compromise. Just a clip of the golf cart fatting down the street, leaving me standing on the driveway, heart racing, mind spinning. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical if it weren't terrifying. I slammed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long, shaky breath. I was angry, frustrated, terrified, and yet strangely exhilarated. Something had shifted in me during those few minutes. I realized I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to let them bully me, intimidate me, or destroy me, not without a fight. I spent the rest of the day packing, planning, imagining what the next move would be. Would they return? Would lawyers show up? Was the next confrontation going to be in court, or somewhere else entirely? Every creak of the floor, every car driving by, every shadow outside felt like a threat. And as night fell, I made a silent vow. I would not be a victim. I would not be intimidated. And if the HOA thought they could scare me into submission, they had another thing coming. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to be pretty. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, the HOA officers, clipboards in hand, smug smiles plastered across their faces as if they had already won. My dreams were a nightmare loop of golf carts rolling down my driveway, fines piling higher and higher, my mailbox tipping over like some innocent victim of a cruel war. By dawn, I was already packing, notebook in hand, coffee untouched, scribbling notes like a general preparing for battle. Every violation had to be documented. Every inch of grass measured. Every fence panel photographed. I wasn't going to let them have even an inch of leverage. My hands shook, my mind raced, but I felt alive. There was a fire inside me now. Fear had morphed into determination. And determination, I decided, could be more dangerous than any weapon. By mid-morning, the first signs of real escalation appeared. I spotted a car parked a few houses down, a neighbor, sure, or maybe a friendly passerby, but my paranoia had me convinced it was reconnaissance. I peeked through the blinds, heart hammering, imagining the HOA board members communicating through hidden radios, plotting their next move. My imagination had never been so vivid. I started obsessively checking the property. The fence, the mailbox, the grass. My lawn had never looked so pristine or suspicious. I measured the mailbox at least 3 times, walked the fence line like a detective inspecting a crime scene, and even counted the blades of grass in one corner just to convince myself I was prepared. My cat watched me warily, clearly questioning my sanity. Then came the first threatening email. Subject line, "Final notice. Immediate compliance required." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were detailed descriptions of every violation, pictures I was pretty sure had been taken without my knowledge, and a stern warning that legal action would commence if the fine wasn't paid immediately. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. I felt cornered, trapped, and yet oddly exhilarated. I knew I had to push back. I couldn't let them intimidate me. Not now, not ever. I started drafting my response, careful, precise, meticulous. Every word had to count. Every argument had to be airtight. But the more I wrote, the more I realized something unsettling. I wasn't just fighting a fine anymore. I was fighting an entire system built to crush people like me, and the system was relentless, unforgiving, and absurd. By afternoon, I was packing again. Every little sound outside made me jump. Birds chirping, suspicious. Neighbor's lawnmower, clearly reconnaissance. The wind brushing against the windows, proof that the HOA's influence reached everywhere. I was losing my mind, or maybe just sanity, as the stakes rose higher than I ever imagined. Then the knock came. Not a polite knock, not a casual tap, a deliberate, slow knock that made my heart leap. I froze, my hands clenched into fists. The shotgun sat in the corner, silent, watching. My mind flashed to the previous confrontation. This time I told myself I wouldn't be caught off guard. I opened the door an inch. 2 officers stood there again, their clipboards like shields, their faces a mixture of authority and amusement. "Mr. Wilson," one said, voice calm but edged with menace, "we need to discuss compliance again. There are additional penalties now. Your property is under scrutiny for repeated violations." I felt my knees weaken, my palms sweat. My mind raced through every rule, every bylaw, every ridiculous fine. I swallowed hard and forced a calm tone. "Look, I've documented everything. Every measurement, every photograph. I'm prepared to prove my compliance. You don't need to escalate this further." They didn't flinch, didn't blink. One of them stepped closer. "The board has spoken. The fines are valid. Non-payment will result in immediate legal action." I felt the anger rising, a storm inside me. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. This wasn't about grass or fence color. This was about power, control, and intimidation. And I realized something terrifying. This was just the beginning. If I didn't stand my ground, they would keep pushing, tightening the screws until there was nothing left. I closed the door slowly, heart racing. I knew I had to prepare for the next step. Legal counsel, sure, documentation, absolutely. But what they didn't understand, and would never understand, was that I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had transformed into a fierce, obsessive determination. And sometimes, determination could move mountains, or at least terrify bureaucrats who thought they had all the power. As night fell, I sat in the dark, notebook open, flashlight in hand, planning. Every inch of my property scrutinized. Every possible loophole explored. Every scenario imagined. I knew that the next confrontation would not be easy. And I also knew, deep down, that once it came, nothing would ever be the same. Tomorrow, the battle would escalate even further. And I had no idea if I was ready for the storm that was coming. Saturday morning arrived with a strange, heavy quiet. The neighborhood looked normal, lawns mowed, kids biking, neighbors waving, but I felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Every rustle, every distant car, every shadow against the walls made me jump. Today wasn't going to be a normal day. I knew it. I paced the living room, notebook in hand, photographing the fence one last time, checking the mailbox angle obsessively, measuring the grass again. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. The shotgun in the corner seemed to watch me, silent, patient, almost judging. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But it was there, a quiet reminder that I was ready, that I wouldn't be intimidated. And then I heard it, the familiar hum of a golf cart approaching. Only this time it wasn't distant. It stopped right outside my driveway. I peeked through the blinds. 2 officers stepped out, clipboards in hand, faces unreadable. Their posture was different this time, tense, deliberate. They weren't here to chat. They were here to enforce. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. My palms were sweaty, my knees weak, but I forced my voice steady. "Good morning," I said, opening the door halfway, keeping my hands visible. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," one of them said, voice calm but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "We're here regarding repeated violations and unpaid fines. Additional penalties may be applied if noncompliance continues." I tried to keep my composure, but my mind was racing. Every possible scenario flickered through my brain. Courtrooms, lawyers, eviction notices, but also confrontation, standoffs, the absurd fantasy of finally standing up to these bureaucrats. I swallowed hard. "I've documented everything," I said, holding up my notebook like evidence in a trial. "Measurements, photographs, timelines, I'm prepared to prove my compliance. There's no need to escalate further." They exchanged a glance. That glance made my blood run cold. One officer stepped closer, clipboard raised like a shield. "The board has made its decision. You will comply immediately. Non-payment will result in legal action and additional fines. This is your final warning." I felt a flush of anger. Not just at the fine, not just at the absurdity of it all, but at the audacity of these people thinking they could walk into my life, dictate terms, and expect compliance without resistance. My fingers twitched. My jaw clenched. My heart raced. I laughed nervously at first, then bitterly. "You're serious? Over a mailbox, a fence, some grass, you've officially lost your mind." They didn't react. Their faces were stone. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about compliance anymore. It was about control, about intimidation, and maybe a little bit about power. I stepped back, closed the door slightly, letting it hang between us like a barrier. I didn't need the shotgun to feel ready. My resolve was weapon enough. I won't pay $100,000. Not for this. Not now, not ever. There was a pause, long, tense. I could hear my own breathing, feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Then unexpectedly the officers backed down, at least for now. One of them gave a slight nod, almost like a concession, and they returned to their golf cart. The engine hummed to life, and slowly, deliberately, they rolled down the street, leaving me standing in the driveway, heart pounding, body trembling. I slammed the door, leaning against it for support. The absurdity of it all hit me. I had just stared down the agents of bureaucracy, and they had blinked. But I also knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. They would return. They would try again. And I had to be ready. I walked through my home, checking the fence, the mailbox, the grass. Everything seemed smaller now. Less important. The real battle wasn't about property lines or fine print. It was about willpower, about standing your ground, about refusing to let an organization control your life with arbitrary rules and insane fines. I sat down, notebook in hand, and started writing. Plans, contingencies, arguments, defenses, every thought, every idea, every strategy. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a soldier in a war I hadn't asked for but had been forced into. By the time night fell, I felt exhausted, exhilarated, and terrified all at once. The neighborhood was quiet again, but the tension lingered, like smoke in the air after a fire. I knew one thing for certain. The HOA would be back, and when they returned, nothing would be ordinary anymore. Tomorrow, the stakes would rise even higher, and I wasn't going to back down. I wouldn't. The next morning, the neighborhood was unnervingly quiet. The air felt heavier, charged, like the calm before a storm that had already passed but still left destruction in its wake. I walked outside, notebook in hand, surveying my domain. The fence looked the same, the mailbox stood straight, the grass had been cut down to military precision. and yet nothing felt normal anymore. The HOA hadn't returned yet, and part of me wondered if this calm was a trap. My imagination raced, picturing them hiding behind hedges, clipboards ready, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. My hand brushed against the shotgun in the corner. I didn't need it, not really, but knowing it was there made me feel safer. Not just physically, but mentally. A strange kind of power. By mid-morning, my phone rang. I jumped, nearly dropping it. It was the HOA's lawyer. My stomach dropped. The voice on the line was formal, cold, but not without a hint of exhaustion. "Mr. Wilson, we've reviewed your documentation. The board acknowledges your compliance, and fines have been reduced. Legal action will not proceed, provided there are no future violations." I blinked, my brain struggled to process the words. Reduced, acknowledged, no legal action. Part of me wanted to laugh hysterically. Another part wanted to cry. And yet another, smaller part wondered, was this a trap? I asked, voice shaking slightly, "So it's over?" "Yes," they said, crisp, professional, "for now, but the board expects continued compliance." Click. The line went dead. I sank into a chair, staring at the wall. My hands were trembling. I was alive. I had survived. The $100,000 nightmare had been diffused. And yet, I couldn't shake the tension, the paranoia, the sense that this battle wasn't really over, it had only shifted. I walked outside again, letting the sun hit my face. The neighborhood looked innocent, ordinary, perfect, but I knew better. I had looked behind the curtain. I had stared at bureaucracy at its most merciless and absurd, and I had survived. Somehow, against ridiculous odds, against people who thrived on control, I had survived. I laughed a little hysterically, a little bitterly. The irony wasn't lost on me. All this drama, fear, paranoia over a fence, a mailbox, some grass. And yet in that absurdity I felt alive. Stronger, smarter, more aware of the fragility of normal life than ever before. The shotgun stayed in the corner, silent, a relic of preparation, a reminder that even the smallest symbol of power can change your perception. I didn't need it anymore, not really. But I wasn't taking it down. Not yet. Some lessons are too important to forget. Neighbors waved as they walked by, oblivious to the mental war I'd just survived. I waved back, smiling, feeling a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. I wondered how many of them would ever understand the absurd, terrifying, and darkly hilarious world that lay just beneath the surface of their perfect lawns and pristine fences. By evening, I sat down with a beer, notebook closed, my mind finally starting to unwind. The documents, the photos, the obsessive measurements, they weren't just proof of compliance anymore. They were evidence of survival, of standing your ground, of refusing to let fear dictate your life. And I knew one thing for sure, I would never look at a fence, a mailbox, or a patch of grass the same way again. They weren't just objects. They were symbols. Symbols of control, of resistance, of the absurd war we fight against rules that are bigger than sense. The HOA might have backed down this time, but in the quiet of my home, in the stillness of my neighborhood, I felt something shift. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was someone who had stared into the bureaucracy's face, someone who had survived, and someone who wouldn't be intimidated again. I finished my beer, leaned back, and smiled wryly. Life was back to normal, sort of. But the memory of those days, the letters, the fines, the threats, the standoffs, would linger forever. And maybe, just maybe, I'd tell the story to someone someday, and they'd laugh or gasp or shake their head in disbelief. Because the truth was stranger than fiction. And in the end, sometimes the absurd, terrifying fight over a mailbox and a fence teaches you more about courage, sanity, and stubbornness than anything else ever could. And as I finally turned off the lights that night, the silence of the neighborhood settling around me, I knew one thing. I had won, at least for now. But the shadow of the HOA and the lesson of never underestimating the absurdity of bureaucracy would stay with me forever. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.